Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Can anybody out there hear me? I seem to be having some audio problems here for some unknown reason here tonight. Anybody out there in the chat? I see Informally Hip out there. Jason White. What's up, everybody? Good to see you guys out there in the chat. Sorry, we'll get started here momentarily. Having a little bit of audio issue for some reason or another here. Restream's been a little bit quirky lately for me. I don't know what the reasoning would be. We're broadcasting tonight on YouTube and Facebook. Going to be broadcasting some live streams coming up soon on Rockfin as well, but not tonight. Tonight we're sticking with YouTube, simply because, that's where most people know where to find me, and I'm just trying to get the word out to everybody. We've moved our operations over mostly to Rockfin, and I do have some new original content on there already posted for anybody that wants to check that out. But in the meantime, we're going to tonight go through the Hermetic Science of Motion and Number, and we're going to do Lesson 2, the Law of Opposites, and a lot of this stuff's really fascinating. So we'll probably talk for about an hour here tonight, and we'll discuss a couple of the aspects that are displayed in that book. So that being the case, I was trying to roll in with my new intro music, which was just written and produced by the very talented Mr. Jason Lindgren. But for some reason, I'm having trouble getting my audio mixer here to work properly. So I'm going to have to work on that. I do have a stream up on Rockfin right now where you could hear the song in its entirety in the opening of one of the new shows that I just put out over there. But hopefully I'll have that working next time I live stream. I'm not going to stop live streaming on YouTube here either. I'm going to start doing that again as well. So anyway, let's just let a couple more people filter in here, and we'll get started. So tonight, like I said, we're going to discuss Lesson 2, the Law of Opposites, in this book titled Hermetic Science of Motion and Number, and this is a really fantastic book. If people would like to check it out, it's definitely worth the time to take and read it. And this was written by Mr. A.S. Raleigh. And there's some really great information in here. It gives you a really fantastic primer of a lot of alchemical sciences and things of that nature. So let's see. Just give it a minute here. Let me find my place in the book here. Last time we went over Lesson 1, and we were able to explore a lot of different avenues of thought that really don't seem to come up too often in our modern world. But when you look back at some of these old philosophical ways, things begin to make more sense to you when you look around at the world today and are able to see it, in a different view. So anyway, let's see what time we got. We have 8 minutes after. We'll give it till 10 after, and then I'll go ahead and begin the reading in earnest. This book, let's go a little, while we're waiting for a couple more people to trickle in here. We'll look at the publication dates and all of that wonderful stuff. This was a book put out by a publishing company called DeVores and Company, Box 550, Marina Del Rey, California. And this is copyright 1924, with a first paperback edition written in 1981. So, this book is very old, but it's also very valuable. So, there's a lot of really fantastic information in here. And last time we talked about different aspects about motion and number and things about atoms and different ways to think about atoms and some different elemental ideas just to kind of put us where we're at. Anyhow, let's go ahead and find my place again in here because I lose my place very easily sometimes. Sometimes, my mouth goes faster than my brain and it's hard to keep up, so... All right, so good to see everybody here. Glad to see everybody here in the chat. Stephanie Martin, that's okay. You got my name wrong. Migraine Fog. It's all good. Not a problem at all. I'm just glad to have everybody here. I don't do a lot of live streaming simply because it's with my crazy life and my crazy schedule that I keep. Sometimes it's hard to really get on a regular basis, so I kind of do these very sporadically. But I plan on trying to make a little more time for live streaming. And of course, we do a live stream every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time over on Secrets of Saturn with Jason Lindgren, and we've moved over to Rockfin with that as well. And we've had some good turnout over on Rockfin. Very glad to see people moving over there. It's definitely worth the price because for just $9.99 a month, not only do you get access to, say, my premium content on there, but everybody that's on the platform, you get all of that premium content, and there's a lot of really good stuff over there. Jason's over there with Secrets of Saturn. Crow moved over his first hour work over there, and there's a lot of different things going on over there, and a lot of different creators. Brian Stavely just moved over there recently as well. He's putting a lot of his work. Boy, he pounds out material left and right. I give him a lot of props, but anyway, without further ado, let's get started here tonight because we're only going to run until about 11 p.m. Eastern Time here. Try and squeeze it in about an hour. But we'll discuss the important aspects, and if we have to, we'll go a little longer if we must. But I know everybody's time is valuable, so I try not to, do too much jibber-jabbering here. Anyway, let's move into it. Lesson 2, the law of opposites. The 10 pairs of opposites of Pythagoras were, first, right and left. Second, even and odd. Third, hot and cold. Fourth, hard and soft. Fifth, light and darkness. Sixth, male and female. Seventh, good and evil. Eighth, stationary and movable. Ninth, square and oblong. And 10th, wet and dry. Within these 10 pairs of opposites is contained the entire law of opposites in all of its variations. As was stated in the first lesson, the ultimate physical atoms of ether, by combination, become the electrons of electricity and magnetism according to the rate of vibration with which they move, magnetism being one rate lower in the vibratory scale than electricity. Everything in the material world is merely the result of the combination of these two principles. And I'm going to pause there, folks. This is a very important thought to keep in mind. So that being the case, if you keep that in mind, you eventually garner a better understanding of how the world around us works, because I find that to be true. The world operates on a system of polarity between electricity and magnetism. It's the dielectric current is how things run. And when you actually look at the physical models of how magnetism operates in this way, you could see that this forms the conjugate geometry of how the universe works and that kind of thing. So it's an important aspect to keep in mind. But let's not get too hung up on that. We've got a lot of material to cover here, so I'll move along. Not only this, but the vital and mental atoms are also differentiated in some way into two forces analogous to electricity and magnetism. In fact, on all the planes of nature, we find this twofold force manifesting itself and being the law and cause of all activity. The electric is the masculine principle, and the magnetic the feminine principle of nature. In man, the brain is sexed, the left hemisphere being the seat of the electrical force, and the right hemisphere the seat of the magnetic force. This is true of all the various principles in man. The nerves from the left hemisphere of the brain pass over to the right side of the body, thus making a cross as they pass from the brain to the body. Thus it is that while the left side of the brain is the electrical center, it governs the right side of the body. Likewise, the right side of the brain, the magnetic center, governs the left side of the body. It is because of a realization of this principle that artists, when painting a portrait to represent strength, dignity, grandeur, courage, nobility, and force, all masculine attributes, paint the right side of the face, Well, if they wish to represent beauty, ideality, purity, gentleness, meekness, and affection, all feminine attributes, they paint the left side of the face, and this is true, although they know nothing of the great sexual law. And I'm going to pause there. A lot of interesting ideas, are really bound up right there in that last paragraph. Think about that. I mean, this is something that holds true regardless of whether you realize it or not. And that's what this is pointing out. If you look at the way artists work, they're kind of more what you would call left-brained, I guess. And, as compared to people that are kind of more staunch or scientific in, their viewpoints or logical per se, that they would be more right-brained. So you could see this distinction and how it's, given these masculine and feminine attributes with each side of the brain. And this holds true in everybody. So, I mean, this is, some pretty basic universal stuff that I think if we understand these premises, we could have a better realization of how things actually work in this world. So, anyway, let's continue on. The outward effects of this law are so prominent that they may be easily noted by anyone. For the same reason, the man walks on the right, the woman on the left, thus recognizing the true position as the electrical and magnetic personality. Even the sex organs of the man are largely on the right side of the body. Likewise, those of the female are largely on the left side. Kind of pause there. I don't know if that's actually physiologically been demonstrated or not, but, let's continue on with the reading and see. The electrical force goes down the right arm and out through the right hand, making it the channel through which the electrical force escapes. The magnetic force goes down through the left arm and out through the left hand, making that the channel through which the magnetic force escapes. In healing, electricity passes through the right hand and magnetism through the left hand. For this reason, the right hand has become emblematic of the electrical force of nature and the left hand of the magnetic force of nature. By right and left is therefore meant the electrical and magnetic forces of the nature out of which all things in the material world are produced. And as electricity and magnetism are merely different rates of vibration, it follows that right and left are also only different rates of vibration. And I'm going to pause there, folks. This comes down to the idea of frequency and vibration once again. You could see these different cymatic concepts bound up in this, and even Nikola Tesla advised, if you want to better understand how the universe works, think in terms of frequency and vibration. And that holds true with these Hermetic principles here. And many of these things have been tested through time, and they've been found to be tried and true. Although, in our modern era, we're not taught about these things by and large. These are some of the secrets held by the mystery schools and the secret societies of today. Many of these different ideas. So we've been taught to really think of these things as being kind of archaic and not really all that useful or accurate as descriptors of our world. But the case is, many of these things hold true still, even today. I mean, it's a different way of thinking about things, and you kind of have to adjust your thinking patterns to see things this way. But once you do, things start to make a whole lot more sense than with the hyper material description we've been given of everything. So that being the case, let's move on with the reading. Excuse me. Got a little tickle in my throat. Next section here says even and odd. Even represents those conditions where the electrical and magnetic forces are evenly balanced, where the equilibrium is perfectly maintained, while on the other hand, odd represents those conditions where one of the above principles greatly predominates over the other, so as to make the object, substance, or principle, as the case may be, prominently and distinctly electrical or magnetic. Even also represents the state where the keynote is weak, and as a result, the molecules are held together in loose affinity, while odd represents the state where the keynote is strong, so that the molecules are bound together in close affinity. When anything is even, the affinity is easily destroyed, and it is easily separated into its component molecules, atoms, electrons, etc. When it is odd, the affinity is with difficulty destroyed, and it is therefore difficult to separate into its component molecules, atoms, electrons, etc. As the electrical and magnetic forces are merely matters of vibration, the proportion of each which may be present is merely a question of the proportion of the two rates of vibration. And as the affinity and the keynote are alike matters of vibration, deriving their strength and power from the intensity of the vibration, the whole matter is merely a question of vibration. Even and odd, therefore, represent merely rates of vibration and different states of combination in the electrical and magnetic forces. And then we're going to pause there for a moment. There's a lot of key ideas written right into this here, folks. The thing is, if we're looking at even numbers, this is where things are in balance. And when we see odd numbers thrown about, this is where there's an imbalance somewhere, and one of these forces has predilection over the other. And that being the case, also, this has an effect on the keynote, as it says here. The keynote in an even numbered type situation where there's balance is easily broken. Okay, whereas the keynote of an odd is not easily broken. So we could see why they always bind up many of these, say, rituals and performances and things they do with the odd numbers, and some especially powerful odd numbers, like, say, the number 9 and the number 11. So that being the case, this is why they tend to avoid, in what I would call the broken feedback loop system, where we skip over number 10 and go right from 9 to 11. I would call that, the reason that they do that is the perfection of the number 10, the balance. They don't want the balance because they want to maintain the power. So that being the case, in order to maintain the power, they try to skip over where there's a system of balance. And that, then they have that leverage that they could use to maintain their control, their grip of control. But not to belabor that point too much, let's go ahead and move on to the next section here. Hot and cold. John Tyndall has shown that heat is merely a mode of motion, or in other words, molecular vibration. When the molecules reach a certain point in the intensity of their vibration, they become hot, and then the higher their rate of vibration, the hotter they become. It therefore appears that heat is merely a certain rate of vibration. The mistake which scientists here make, however, is in denying the reality of cold, calling it merely the absence of heat. Cold is no more the absence of heat than heat is the absence of cold, heat being the result of a certain rate of vibration. Cold is the result of the absence of that rate of vibration. As inertia exists nowhere, this rate of vibration is absent because another rate of vibration is present. Cold is therefore a mode of motion, a rate of vibration, quite as much as heat. All vibrations of electricity are hot. All vibrations of magnetism are cold. The dividing line between heat and cold is, therefore, the point at which electricity becomes magnetism. This is not only true on the physical plane, but also of the vital and mental, the Buddhic and spiritual. Wherever we go, we find that the magnetic is cold, and the more magnetic it becomes, the colder it becomes. The electric is hot, and the more electric it becomes, the hotter it becomes. And I'm going to pause right there, folks. This leads back to the ideas of fire. Once again, fire and water, the elemental core ideas that we discussed, in the last section of this book. And once again, we see how this whole rate of vibration thing holds to be true too, because it's said that the molecules, when they're heated up by, say, like sunlight or something, they move faster, whereas something without heat applied to it, the molecules are stagnant and don't move at all. So you can see it's equating this to a rate of motion, a rate of vibration. Okay, so with that, we could see some of the different concepts that are at play here. So when you're thinking of something that's magnetic, you could know that it's attributionally cold. Okay, there's a lot of different crossover points where you could look at something and know so much more about something than what you would. Whereas if you see cold, well, that's more magnetic than electrical. So winter is more of a magnetic type principle, and summer would be more of an electric type principle. So you could see how these things correlate in different ways. And it says here about wherever the magnetic becomes colder and the electric becomes hotter, where the point where they meet, this is where the switchover occurs. So you could see how this could equate to, say, like an equinox or something of that nature when you're trying to compare it to like the seasons of the year. You could see how all these different attributional things tie together. And this is what this chapter here is talking about. Well, I call it a chapter. He has it listed as lessons in the book, and it's I guess it's more important to think of them more as lessons, but he's talking about these 10 principles that Pythagoras put together as far as the opposites, the 10 groups of opposites, and how everything falls into this category. And some of these opposites actually cross over with each other, but knowing how these opposite pairs work, you could know so much more about a thing just based upon these different principles. So you could know that if something's cold, well, that relates to magnetism. That relates to the feminine principle. That relates to the element of water. You could see how all these things attributionally can hold true, and you could know so much more about something than what the surface would show you, just by understanding these principles. But let's get back to the reading here. Says, heat and cold are, therefore, merely the effect of the electrical and magnetic forces of nature in their vibratory activity. It must be borne in mind that this remark applies to all the principles of man and nature, as well as to the physical. In heating matter, we merely raise the vibration so as to produce the degree of heat which we desire. By so doing, we make it electrical. As water freezes, its vibration is continually lowered, and thus it becomes magnetic. A hot bath is always electrical, while a cold bath is always magnetic. Take a person who is intensely magnetic and give him a hot bath, and it will draw off the superabundance of magnetism, at the same time giving off to his body a quantity of electricity. Will restore the equilibrium, and in this way be most beneficial. Going to pause there. This is another interesting idea. Once again, you could relate what we would call dis-ease in the body to some of these different principles. So if somebody is suffering from a dis-ease, that's causing them some kind of symptoms that we could relate to, say, something more magnetic, well, take a hot bath. It'll help. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't hurt to explore these different ideas. Because, like I said, these are time-tested ideas, and it's held true. I mean, these go back to some of the smartest people who ever walked the earth. I mean, you're talking about guys like Pythagoras and, different people like that, and Plato, and all the other ones, So, anyway, but where did we leave off here? I lost my place. Bear with me for a minute. Oh, here we go. Okay. On the other hand, let an intensely electrical person take a hot bath, and the bath will draw off a part of his already diminished magnetism, at the same time giving him still more electricity, so as to make the unbalanced condition still worse, and will be, therefore, most injurious, and if persisted in long enough, will cause death. For life is the result of the balancing of the two forces. And I'm going to pause there again, folks. Life exists in the midpoint where electricity and magnetism meet. We would call this the plane of inertia, if we were looking at it from a physics standpoint or something like that. This is where life exists, at the plane of inertia, if you're trying to look at it as a geometrical type thing. Picture it like the electricity and magnetism analogy here as a toroid, which would be your donut shape, and like that hourglass shape, which is the counter of the toroid, and it would form a perfect sphere, these two shapes together. Well, in the center there, where the inside of the toroid meets the center point of where the hourglass shape comes through, that would be your plane of inertia. Okay, and this is where life exists and manifests and, begins manifestation and comes into being. So, that being the case, and if anybody's interested in exploring these ideas in, electricity and magnetism and stuff more, I could recommend there's a book out there. It's available for free. I can't remember the title of it, but the author of it, his name is Ken Wheeler, and he's a really smart guy, and he's put a lot of this stuff together. And it really lines up with much of the hermetics and stuff like that most people overlook. So if you have an interest in this kind of thing, how electricity and magnetism and stuff work, check out his writing. He does an awful lot of stuff out there. So I appreciate his work. He is a really smart guy, and he puts it all together with the actual science chops to prove what he's saying. So a lot of these things kind of correlate directly with that. And that's what this book is talking about here. So let's get back to the reading. In the same way, let a strongly electrical person take a cold bath, and the magnetic bath will draw off the superabundance of the electrical force, at the same time giving him a part of its magnetism, thus tending to establish equilibrium, and will in this way be most beneficial. On the other hand, let an intensely magnetic person take a cold bath, and the magnetic water will draw off some of his already depleted electrical force, and at the same time give to him still more magnetic force, tending still more to overturn the equilibrium. In this case, it will prove most injurious, and if persisted in long enough, will result in death. This is the reason why hydropaths so often kill their patients. I'm going to pause there. I'm not sure what a hydropath is, folks, but I'm guessing it's somebody that treats different diseases with some kind of bath therapy or something like that. Just a guess here. Anyway, let's continue with the reading. They will put an electrical patient into a hot bath or a magnetic patient into a cold bath, and thus they are wrecked. Whereas, had they placed the electrical patient into a cold bath and the magnetic patient into a hot bath, they would have been greatly benefited. No person should ever attempt to practice hydropathy without an understanding of this law of polarity and also the ability to diagnose the electrical and magnetic condition of his patient. This all applies equally to the thermal treatment, to electrotherapeutics, and to animal magnetism. Heat and cold are therefore merely another name for electricity and magnetism. And I'm going to pause there, folks. And he was referring here to animal magnetism. This is referring back to some of the work of a gentleman named Mesmer. Okay, so when you look at Mesmer, this guy really knew some stuff. And a lot of what he had talked about and stuff has really been taken out of context through the years, and a lot of, the mainstream has really put a negative connotation on some of what he had discovered and was teaching about. And yes, I would agree. Hydrotherapy, I'm sure, is legit. So, that being the case, I had never heard that term before up here, though. What did he call it? A hydropath. So I guess that's somebody that practices this hydrotherapy. But a lot of these things are lost, especially to our medical practitioners of today. They don't think in terms of some of these older ideas, and they're missing the boat on a lot of these different things. And once again, that all ties back to the aspect of the hyper-materialist viewpoint that has been so heavily pushed in our society today, and that's done for a reason. But let's get back to the reading here. Next section, hard and soft. As all substances are merely a collection of molecules held together by affinity, resulting from the harmony of their vibration, the closer the affinity is, the more intense the vibration. The harder it becomes to displace the molecules owing to the tenacity with which they adhere and cohere one to the other. In this case, the substance becomes hard because of the strength of its keynote, the intensity of its vibration, and the closeness of its affinity. On the other hand, the looser the affinity, the lower the rate of vibration, the more easy it becomes to displace the molecules owing to the laxity with which they adhere and cohere one to another. In this case, the substance becomes soft because of the weakness of its keynote, the lowness of its rate of vibration, and the looseness of its affinity. Hardness and softness are, therefore, different states of affinity, growing out of different states of the vibratory activity of the constituent molecules of the substance. Hardness is therefore merely another name for close affinity, and softness for loose affinity. The only difference is therefore a difference in vibration. Gonna pause there again, folks. So we're looking at different ideas here, like the keynote and affinity here. And he's saying it's affinity, vibration, and that kind of stuff going on, which attributes to this. So we're talking about hardness or softness of an item or of an object, and it's all about the different rates of vibration. So that being the case, we could see where this leads. I mean, once again, it goes back to some of these older cymatic type ideas, and electricity and magnetism being the key to a lot of this. But let's continue on here. Next section says, light and darkness. Light is a mode of motion, a rate of vibration. In the pure ether, all is darkness. It is only when ether is differentiated into electricity and magnetism that light appears. As electricity and magnetism are different rates of vibration from ether, therefore light is a different rate of vibration from darkness. Darkness is not the absence of light any more than light is the absence of darkness. And I'm going to pause there, folks. Our modern science wants us to believe that darkness is just the absence of light. This is telling us the opposite here. Okay, darkness exists without light, and think about that. Think about that concept. Would light exist without darkness, and would darkness exist without light? And it's saying darkness is the normal, modus operandi of ether, but until electricity and magnetism are introduced to it, and that produces light. So you could kind of see how this could be construed, if you look at it from a scientific viewpoint, as holography, or how all things are kind of like what we would consider a hologram or something along those lines, because light is produced because of the manifestation of electricity and magnetism through this ether. Okay, so this kind of thing, if you look at it from that perspective, all things are made of some form of light, okay, that exists within this world we live in. Once again, you can see rate of vibration and that kind of stuff comes front and center when you're thinking in this type of way. And this is a lot different way of thinking than we've ever been taught in our schooling and stuff like that. So that kind of thing, it's a different mode of thinking. Okay, it's thinking in a more philosophical type way than the hyper-materialist science viewpoint that we have today, where they're obsessed with trying to measure and quantify everything, and not everything's measurable or quantifiable in that kind of way. Many things are very subjective, and the objective viewpoint of our scientific method and our understanding of the scientific method only takes us so far. Some things you need to look at in another way, and science is only one way of looking at things or observing things. And, that being the case, it misses out on a lot of things. But anyway, where did we leave off? I don't want to get hung up too long on that kind of an idea here. So, as electricity and magnetism are different rates of vibration from ether, therefore light is a different rate of vibration from darkness. Darkness is not the absence of light any more than light is the absence of darkness. They are each merely the effect of different rates of vibration. All was darkness before the light vibration was imparted to the ether, causing the light to be born out of the darkness. For out of night was born the day. Remember, light is one rate of vibration and darkness the other, and that is the only absolute and ultimate distinction between the two. Next section, male and female. The male is the embodiment of the electrical principle. His sex organs are the means through which the electrical force is manifested. Not only this, but the entire bodily form is a physical expression of this principle. Not only is the electric principle expressed through the physical body, but the life, the emotional nature, and the mind, as well as the soul and the spirit, show forth the electrical principle in all of their activities. And I'm going to pause there, folks. And these are represented by fire, the element of fire. See? So once again, you could see these different principles at work. You could know these different attributes about something just by knowing a couple of these things. So the masculine force, it's electrical. It relates to the element of fire. It's expressed physically in the physical. It represents the mind, the soul, the spirit, showing forth this electrical principle. It relates back to a lot of things. And when we look at it as an expression of, say, color, a vibratory rate of color, we're looking at the color red would be the masculine color, and the color blue, the feminine color. So when we see something like that, so when we see the color red, we can know the attributions of it. It's masculine in principle. It's electrical in principle. All these different ideas. It could relate to the element of fire. We could know more things about a simple object or item simply by knowing a couple of these principles, and that's an important thing. And it does take a little bit of thinking outside the box and trying to develop this new way of thinking for most of us, which is actually a very old way of thinking, but it's also a more accurate representation of how the world around us really works than what our modern science explains. So let's continue on with the reading here. Let's see. Okay, where did I leave off? Lost my place again, sorry. Okay. Thus, we can see the fallacy of the assertion that sex is only of the body. All the principles of man are sexed. Not only are the principles of man, but also the 7 principles are alike sexed. Sex lies at the very foundation of the constitution of matter. Not only is it present in all form, but also in the very principles of nature itself. The differentiation of ether into electricity and magnetism is merely a case of sexual differentiation. And I'm going to pause there, folks. Sex is, or gender per se, however you want to refer to this, is an important natural attribute, okay? It's attributional to all of nature. It's inherent in everything. We're not just talking about, man per se, or talking about, say, the animal kingdom. It's inherent in everything. It's part of the natural order. And they really like to confuse and try to mess up this whole principle and the way people think about it. And there's a reason for that, because this steers us towards more unnatural type things, towards more artificial things rather than natural order. And that's kind of where they lead us. We talk about this all the time. It's the inversion principle. It's how they maintain control, how they can garner control. These few twisted people at the top of the power structure who understand many of these older alchemical sciences and stuff, they weaponize them against us. So that being the case, that's why they try to twist these things and invert them, because only through total inversion can they create a new control system that they could totally control, because they can't control nature. But they could do their very best to try to invert what the natural order looks like and make their own kind of system of control out of it. So that's the case here. But let's go ahead and read on. As the male is merely the embodiment of the electrical force, so the female is the embodiment of the magnetic force. The feminine spirit, soul, mind, emotion principle, life, and body are merely manifestations of the magnetic principle. Femininity is not limited to the form, however, but the 7 principles of nature are also magnetic and, therefore, feminine as well as electric, and therefore masculine. Nature herself is feminine, magnetic, as well as masculine, electric. Male and female, therefore, are merely electricity and magnetism, and the only difference between the male and female is a difference in the rate of vibration. Gonna pause there, folks. Are you beginning to hear a theme through all of this so far that we've seen? These are all merely a difference in rates of vibration. All these different descriptors, okay? All of these 10 different opposites, these 10 pairs of opposites that Pythagoras describes here. Anyway, let's continue on. Man is therefore the product of the electric vibration, while woman is the product of the magnetic vibration. All beings are bisexual. In the male, the electrical very much predominates. In the female, the magnetic greatly predominates. The sex is determined by the predominating principle. The weaker principle is usually latent, but in the case of the strong-minded woman and the effeminate man, the two principles are much more nearly balanced. Not only is this true, but the personality is in a continuous state of flux. The state of the mind, emotions, soul, and spirit becoming, for the moment, relatively more electrical or magnetic, has the effect of making the principle correspondingly male or female, as the case may be. The higher principles react upon the physical body, making it in turn more masculine or feminine as the electrical or magnetic principle predominates. In this way, the relative balancing of the sexes is continually changing in accordance with the state of the person's life and thought, etc. In this way, we can begin to perceive how the superstition of the changing of men into women and women into men originated. Sexual differentiation is, therefore, a matter of differentiation in the rate of vibration. And I'm going to pause there, folks. This is putting forth an important idea. It says, in this way, the relative balancing of the sexes is continually changing in accordance with the state of the person's life and thought. So, that being the case, people express different masculine or feminine principles at different points in their life, okay? Or depending upon different circumstances in their life. So, with that being the case, sometimes we would represent or ourselves in a more feminine aspect or a more masculine aspect, depending on things. And this is normal and goes on according to natural order, okay? But it's when certain people in positions of authority and power try to obfuscate this balancing act between the two sexes, the sex principle within everybody, where we get kind of a one-sided looking thing, where one of these principles overpowers the other in certain aspects, and it causes this confusion, okay, and causes this unnatural order in this kind of a way. It's the inversion principle at work again. See, that's why they try to invert by manipulating this natural principle here. They manipulate it and push it to the extreme, and therefore are trying to steer people into a confusing type of a situation with these principles. But let's not belabor that point for too long. Let's keep moving here because we're running low on time. Next section, good and evil. God and good in the Anglo-Saxon are synonymous terms. God is the good one. Good is the quality of godlikeness that is good, which brings into closer relation to God. Evil is the reverse. It is that which separates us from God. Because of this original meaning, evil came to mean that which separates, and good that which holds together. Good is the principle of union, cohesion, accretion, while evil is the principle of separation, disintegration, dissolution, individuality. Everything which tends to unite and combine diverse elements is good. Everything which tends to separate, repel, and dissolve all combinations, leaving each element independent, is evil. Good is the constructive principle, and evil the destructive principle of nature. So I'm going to pause there. So you see, with this being the case, good is the constructive principle, evil is the destructive principle. They both need to exist. Okay, and there has to exist a balance between the two in order to keep the natural order and the natural world turning. Okay, so when we look at it from this way, good would be the attractive principle, and evil would be the repulsive principle, the repulsion principle, if you're looking at it in terms of like magnetism or electricity, that kind of thing. So that being the case, let's continue on with the reading here. That which unites, constructs, and combines the diverse elements is the principle of attraction. All elements attract like elements of opposite polarity. The law of attraction is therefore the application of the principle of chemical affinity to the molecules, atoms, etc. It is by reason of the affinity existing between the various atoms and molecules that they mutually attract each other and are bound together and united by adhesion and cohesion, thus forming a structure. Affinity is the outgrowth of the interaction of the electrical and magnetic forces. Whenever electric and magnetic forces are acting in conjunction, they result in the state of affinity, which produces attraction and therefore leads to accretion, union, etc., forming a structure held together by means of its keynote. The harmony of electric and magnetic vibration is, therefore, the essence of good. And I'm going to pause there, folks. So, the harmony of electric and magnetic vibration forms what's called the keynote. And this is the essence of good or goodness, okay? Keep that in mind. This is the attractive principle. This is harmony. This is how things are held together. So you see how we need these two polarities. And I've tried to steer away from using the term duality, because it's not really truly duality that we exist in. It's more polarity. We need both sides of this, of these polar opposites in order for things to manifest here. Okay, this is how everything's created. This is your male and female attribute, the electric, the magnetic. This is how all things come to be. This is the very science of manifestation when it comes down to it. All these things exist and have to have their polar opposites in order to exist. So let's continue with the reading here. It must not be assumed that this applies to the physical plane alone, for, on the contrary, all the planes of nature manifest this same principle. Good on the plane of emotion, the mental plane, the spiritual plane, or the plane of the soul, is precisely the same in its ultimate essence as physical good. The point to be fixed in mind is that good of every description and on every plane is merely the harmonious polarizing of the two opposing forces for the production of affinity, leading to the attraction of the diverse elements into union of the same, thus forming a structure on whatever plane of nature it may belong. Evil is the principle of repulsion operating among the component atoms and molecules of a structure unto the destruction of the keynote, and thus unto the disintegration of the structure and the dissolution of the union existing between the diverse elements composing the same. Gonna pause there for a second, folks. So, this is an important idea. Once again, we're looking at the idea of the keynote. And this is an important concept for us to really explore, the keynote. This is what holds it all together, okay? Everything has its own keynote. And this would be the harmonious combination of these different polarities within a different, say, object or person or whatever the case may be. Everything that has manifestation in the physical and on these other planes of existence, it even says here, has this keynote principle that holds it all together. This is the essence of being, per se. So, that being the case, and in my view, I think this keynote idea, the alchemical idea, has been perverted by our modern science, and they called it the God particle. And that's kind of what they're looking for. They're trying to give it this hyper-materialist kind of manifestation and try to utilize it in that way. And it's not. That's an inversion of the alchemical way that's represented here, of what this keynote is. It's a total misdescription of that thing and an inversion of what it really truly means and is. And you'll notice that what they do to find this quote-unquote God particle is the destructive principle, whereas the keynote is a constructive principle. So you could see the inversion at work there. So anyway, that's just a little side note tangent that I find interesting. at any rate. But let's continue reading. Repulsion is due to the absence of affinity, is due to the fact that the electrical and magnetic forces are acting in opposition one to another. One neutralizes the other so that no polarity is possible between the diverse elements. Union is therefore impossible. Repulsion, resulting in disintegration and dissolution of the entire structure, is the result. Thus, the essence of evil is merely the antagonistic activity of the electric and magnetic forces, as good is their harmonious activity. Good is the result of polarity. Evil is the absence of polarity. Neither must we suppose this principle of evil to be confined to the physical plane, for on all the planes of nature do we find the manifestations of the principle of antagonism. It is continually tearing down, disintegrating, dissolving, and destroying. Everywhere we go, we see the continuous warfare between the constructive work or good and the destructive work or evil. The first is ever uniting, the second ever separating. The one ever works for cohesion, the other for disintegration. It is solely a question of polarity or antipolarity of electromagnetic energy through harmonious or inharmonious vibration. Going to pause there for a second. So, you see, at any rate, what we're talking about here is, this electrical and magnetic polarity principle, okay? The balance between these two is where life exists, okay? This is, what we would call the plane of inertia here in, the physical world. If you're looking at it from like a type of a geometry type standpoint, that would be your plane of inertia. This is where life exists, the convergence of where electricity and magnetism meet, okay? So if you're looking at it from that physical viewpoint, that's what we're talking about. If you want to look at it from, a more attributional viewpoint, you could see how these things, the electric, the magnetic, how it could be equated to masculine principle, a feminine principle, fire, water, all these different ideas, these archetypes all put together in here. So this is where manifestation occurs, is at this meeting point, okay, between the electrical and the magnetic. And it forms from out of ether. And that's your third principle here. And this relates back to a Trinity type principle. You have the electric, the magnetic, and then the ether from which it comes, or the darkness from which the light comes. So you could see all of these different principles at work, and they all work relative to one another. So it's this balance point where it becomes important. But let's move on here because we're running short on time. Next section says stationary and movable. Whenever the molecules constituting a body are revolving round their center of gravity with such a force that they cannot be drawn from their course by any force which may be brought against them, they may be said to be stationary. Not that they do not move, but that they cannot be moved. Their relation cannot be changed by any external force which may be brought to bear upon them. They maintain their regular laws, notwithstanding all outside opposition. This is merely a case of close affinity. The close affinity is due to an intensity of vibration which overpowers all opposing vibration. When the molecules constituting a body are revolving and vibrating around their center of gravity with laxity as to permit an opposing force to drive them out of their course, they may be said to be movable. Their relation may be changed by force from the outside. They are deflected from their regular course with comparative ease. This is merely a case of loose affinity. The loose affinity depends upon a weak state of vibration and may be altered by an opposing vibration. Also, in another sense, the planetary bodies are movable in the sense that they have a center of gravity outside of themselves, and by reason of the polarity existing between them and this center of gravity, excuse me, they are moved in accordance with that polarity and the affinity. All bodies containing their center of gravity within themselves are stationary. all bodies having a center of gravity outside and independent of themselves are movable. The first is, therefore, complete in itself, having both the electric and the magnetic forces equally active and in a state of balance. The second is incomplete, having one pole so weak that it must find the opposite pole outside of itself and polarize with it in order to attain completion. The only difference between the stationary and the movable is, therefore, a difference in the electromagnetic polarity growing out of a difference in vibration. This distinction is not confined to the physical plane alone, but applies to the higher planes of nature as well. The desire elementals, thought forms, Buddhic forms, and spirit forms are both stationary and movable, and the law, as above outlined, applies to them quite as much as to the physical object. And I'm going to pause there, folks. Excuse me again. So we could see, once again, he's equating these different ideas back to difference in vibration. See, once again, when you think in terms of vibration and frequency, and in terms of electric and magnetic, these kind of ideas, things begin to start to line up and make a little more sense when you understand that it's this polarity principle upon which all manifestation takes place. You could see, how things work a little better, how an imbalance causes a problem, okay? And it ties back to the idea of homeostasis again, which there's some truth to the concept of homeostasis. Everything tries to seek to find its balance. And it's the same thing with, the concept of entropy, okay? Where all things tend towards chaos. I don't know if all things tend towards chaos, but they try to go back to a balanced state. So I think the concept of entropy is kind of misdescribed to us. Things don't really decline into disorder per se through entropy, because all natural order is perfectly ordered and everything tries to find a balance, and nature always self-corrects. So what we see as entropy is misdescribed to us. Okay, it's the matter of nature trying to find its balance back again. So that being the case, let's move on with the reading, because we're a little past time here, but we'll go ahead and go through and finish this whole thing. Next section, square and oblong. The square is the symbol of perfection. The four sides and the four corners represent the fourfold manifestations of ether, to wit, positive electricity, or oxygen, the element of fire, negative electricity, or hydrogen, the element of water, positive magnetism, or carbon, the element of earth, and negative magnetism, or nitrogen, the element of air. The square, therefore, represents the perfect balance of the positive and negative electric and magnetic forces. It is, therefore, the perfect blending and polarization of the fourfold natural force. Out of this resting place of the fourfold energy proceed all things. The square is, therefore, the complete equilibrium of both the forces and both the poles of the same. And I'm going to pause right there. And we've gone on an awful lot on some of the other shows that we've done about this idea of the number 4 being a foundational one. And actually, the number 4, in a lot of older philosophical traditions and stuff, is also equated with the concept of time. Okay, so time itself, could be represented by the number 4, and it's a type of a construct per se. But it's a construct, it's a foundational construct upon which our physical reality here is built, out of necessity, I would say. But, that's just an interesting aside there. But let's move on with the reading here. Excuse me, I can't seem to get rid of this nagging tickle in my throat. The oblong is a square with something added to extend it in one direction. It is therefore not a square, i.e., both the forces are not equally active in both of their poles, but one force, or else one pole, of each force is stronger than the other. the result being that the activity becomes one-sided, giving special activity to the predominating force or pull. It is this special activity of one principle which is represented by the oblong in contradistinction with the perfect equilibrium of both principles represented by the square. This activity is not confined to physical electricity and magnetism, but extends to all the other principles of nature as well as the physical. Every activity of thought, emotion, and intuition, as well as every activity of the spirit, is a manifestation of one of these states of electromagnetic activity, either the perfect square or the oblong. And I'm going to pause there, folks. Once again, we could see where it's, a matter of balance or imbalance when it comes down to it. So an imbalance causes a problem. It causes a disparity that needs a resolution. And the resolution, nature will always bring it back to resolution or to balance. So this is a key point. And once again, if we look at the square or the number 4 as being representative of time, so that's the old adage, time heals all wounds. Same kind of a concept, okay? So you're talking about nature will always correct an imbalance. And, that could be bound up in this whole idea or principle there. Okay, let's move on to the next section, and I think this is the last one in lesson number 2 here. Wet and dry. Substances become wet because of the presence of moisture in them. They are dried out by the action of heat. Heat is caused by raising of the molecular vibration. Therefore, when we raise the rate of vibration of the molecules until it reaches a certain point of intensity, moisture disappears. The substance becomes dry. The higher the rate of vibration, the drier the substance becomes until it reaches the melting point. Dryness is also a characteristic of electricity, while moisture is a characteristic of magnetism. Therefore, a substance becomes dry in proportion as it passes from magnetic to the electric stage. When it has reached the electric vibration, the higher it becomes, the more of the magnetic is eliminated, and thus the drier it becomes. On the other hand, as the magnetic vibration predominates, the substance becomes moist, and the more extremely magnetic it becomes, the more moist it becomes. Anything is therefore moist in proportion as it is magnetic, and dry in proportion as it is electric. Not only is this the case on the physical plane, but also on all the other planes of nature. Vital electricity is dry, and vital magnetism is wet. Mental electricity is dry, and mental magnetism wet. Psychical or buddhic electricity is dry, and psychic or buddhic magnetism is wet. Spiritual magnetism is wet, and spiritual electricity is dry. Again, the two poles of both electricity and magnetism are diverse. Positive electricity is much drier than the negative, and negative magnetism is not so wet as the positive. It may be readily seen from the foregoing that the quality of dryness is merely the electrical quality in anything, and the quality of moisture is merely the magnetic quality. The only difference, therefore, between the wetness and dryness is a difference in electromagnetic polarity. From the foregoing remarks on the pairs of opposites, it may be seen that we have a means of reaching the conception of things in themselves. We may comprehend the abstract and not merely the concrete, the noumenon and not merely the phenomena. We may comprehend right and left in the abstract without relating them to anything, may conceive of them in terms of the absolute. Likewise, evenness and oddness may be conceived in the abstract without thinking of any concrete thing to be either even or odd. In the same way, we can conceive of the abstract principles of heat and cold without thinking of any concrete object to be either hot or cold. Also, we may conceive of the abstract principle of hardness and softness without thinking of anything being either hard or soft. Abstract light and abstract darkness may be in the same way conceived separate and apart from all consciousness of any material object to be affected by the light or the darkness. Likewise, also, may we conceive of the abstract principle of masculinity and femininity separate and apart from any concrete thing to be either male or female. Excuse me. going to continue on here, and I know it sounds very repetitive here, but it's important that we read through this. Also, the abstract principle of good and evil may be comprehended separate and apart from anything to be either good or evil. Likewise, the conception of abstract mobility and immobility separate and apart from anything to be moved or to remain stationary becomes possible. Also, we may conceive of the abstract quality of squareness or oblongness as things in themselves, separate and apart from any concrete object to be either square or oblong, and we may also conceive of the abstract principles of wetness and dryness as things in themselves, separate and apart from any concrete object to be either wet or dry. And I'm going to pause right there. So basically what the author is really the point he's really trying to drive home here is we need to think of these things in an archetypal way, okay? Not think of them as like physical, concrete objects, okay? We have to think of this stuff in more of a philosophical type way, philosophical type term, an abstract thought form, okay? You have to think of these things in an abstract way. Not take it like literal, like what he's saying here, okay? That's the whole point he's trying to drive home here, is we have to think of these things in an archetypal type way. These are archetypes, okay? These pairs of opposites are archetypes. And we could read that, in a lot of different things. And we could know different attributional things about something based upon these. Because as we listed off a lot of these things here, you could know certain principles about a thing based upon just many simple things. Just knowing these 10 pairs of opposites. You could know a great many more things about something just by understanding it. But let's go ahead and finish up the reading here. Okay. Let the student try to realize that these opposite qualities are all things in themselves, are all abstract principles, and not dependent upon any concrete object for their existence, but are self-existent so far as the concrete world is concerned, and that the concrete objects which show forth these qualities are merely the vehicles through which these abstract principles are being manifested to our outward senses, but that the abstract principles are in no way to depend upon such concrete objects for their activity. Let him further conceive of them as merely the activities of the electrical and magnetic principles of nature acting on her various planes. When he understands this, let him conceive electricity and magnetism themselves as merely the twofold manifestation of the one principle pertaining to that particular plane of nature. Lastly, let him conceive of this manifestation as merely the effect of the two states of the vibratory action of the one principle. When all this is perfectly plain to him, so that he understands that all things are merely matters of magneto-electric activity, and that electromagnetism is merely the twofold activity of the one principle, and lastly that the twofold manifestation is the result of a different rate of vibration, hence the whole thing is merely a matter of vibration, and that this law not only applies to the physical world, but to everything else on whatever plane. When all this is clearly seen and comprehended by the student, he has solved the law of opposites. And that's the end of Lesson 2, folks. And let's just go ahead and review that last part here, okay? So you could see when you understand these concepts, what it is this is kind of a framework that all manifestation is built upon. This is kind of a scaffolding upon which our reality is built. Are these polarities, these pairs of opposites? Okay, so this is the principle. And when you think about it in its simplest terms, if you think of everything as being a vibration or a frequency, and being electrical or magnetic, as in its manifestation here, you could better understand the workings of how these things operate and how the world truly operates here. So, with that being the case, we could have a really better view of how things really go here. And it doesn't always line up with what our mainstream science tells us. So, that being the case, it's important to review many of these older philosophical ideas and these alchemical principles, okay? These different hermetic philosophies and things of that nature, because in so doing, we could see a great many things that we would never recognize before just by understanding some of these key concepts here. And this is something that many of the greatest minds of the past had a firm grip on. So they had a much better understanding of the world and how things really go. So with that being said, we're kind of misled by our modern hyper-materialist scientific viewpoint that we've been given as a society. So, that being the case, I think it's important that we stay grounded in some of these concepts, and we could have a little better chance of understanding the reality in which we live. So that's the end of lesson 2 here. And next live stream, I'll do lesson 3, which is the law of balance. And that one should be an interesting one as well. Like I said, this book is fantastic. If anybody wants to pick it up, it's a great primer on many of these different alchemical concepts and these philosophical principles that could give you a better understanding of the world around you. So that being the case, that's the end of our little foray into occult science here tonight, folks. So thanks for coming out and tuning in and hanging out in the chat and everything. I appreciate all of you, and don't forget to check out my new channel over on Rockfin. I'd appreciate it if I need a couple more people to sign up through my channel for Rockfin. It's a great deal, $9.99 a month, and you could get access to all the premium content on the platform. Not just my stuff, but stuff from other great content providers too, like Jason over at Secrets of Saturn. He's on there. Brian Stavely's on there. There's a bunch of different people. The Great Baldini's moved over there now. We're all trying to work with this platform because we think it's the best alternative right now for YouTube, which likes to censor like speech and different content that we would put out. And the safest way to do that is behind a paywall. And this gives people the most bang for their buck. If you go and sign up on there, then you could have access to all of our extra stuff. So it's kind of like a Netflix, but and there's a lot of different things on there. It's not just like truther stuff and whatever you want to call it, conspiracy stuff. There's a lot of that on there, but there's a lot of other different kinds of material on there too. And it's worth checking out. And there's a lot of free stuff. We do free stuff on there too. I'm going to be posting some free videos and things on there as well. It's not all paid content. You can still go on there and view a lot of the free stuff too. But it's an alternative where we're not being censored. So that's why we've all moved over there. But anyway, thanks for hanging out here tonight, folks. We'll catch you next time.